The envelope sat there like it had wandered into the wrong life, pale white, a little too clean for the chipped kitchen counter it rested on. Darius Cole found it under a pizza coupon and a grocery receipt that still smelled faintly of oranges. The handwriting on the front was the kind of fancy you practice once and never quite pull off again. To Darius A. Cole, return address stamped with a tiny crest, Westbridge Academy Alumni Committee. The words below it, class of 2020 reunion, caught the light, like they wanted to be important. He didn't open it right away. He stood with the envelope in his hand, the old window unit groaning in the background, pushing tired air through his one bedroom in Houston's 3rd Ward. The ceiling fan ticked. Somewhere down in the street, a car bass line rolled past like distant thunder. Darius pressed his thumb against the folded flap and felt the paper give a little, like a door that wasn't locked but wanted you to think twice. He told himself to drop it in the trash. There were a lot of things he'd thrown away, a dozen prototypes to bad business plans, and every story about who he was supposed to be, but this wasn't ordinary paper. This was a ghost pretending to be stationary. He slid a knife under the flap and cut a clean line. Inside, cream cardstock with gold trim that tried to look expensive and almost succeeded. You're invited in script that took up too much space. 5-year reunion, Westbridge Banquet Hall, Saturday, 7 p.m. Dress code, cocktail attire. As if a dress code had ever fixed anything, he felt the old building in his body, Westbridge Academy, 40 miles outside the city, where red brick hid 1,000 small cuts. He remembered a sea of white ties and polished shoes, and his own reflection in the glass trophy case, brown skin, hand-me-down blazer a shade to gray, eyes that learned to mask before they learned to argue. Teachers said brilliant, classmates said weird. A counselor smiled and told him he'd go far if he learned to fit in. There were jokes that weren't jokes, comments that weren't comments, just thin blades passed hand to hand. Some of those blades had names: Bradley, Connor, Tyson. Some had no names at all, just laughter zipped up in the brand of a backpack or the angle of a smirk. He set the card on the counter and leaned his palms beside it. The counter was cool. The room smelled like coffee that had given up. He could still trace the old roots in his head, past the lacrosse field, down the hallway where the portrait of the founder eyed him like a warning, into the computer lab where he lived between after-school buses and silence. When you're the only one, silence has shape. It fills the locker next to yours. It sits behind you in homeroom. It wears a team jacket and says your name with a question mark at the end. He exhaled slowly. The air conditioner coughed and rallied. He didn't feel anger, hadn't in a long time. Anger took energy, and his energy had been rationed into other things: terminal windows, code reviews, sleep traded for a shot at something bigger. Anger burns out. Focus builds. He looked around his apartment, not much to look at. A whiteboard on the wall full of boxes and arrows and names that meant nothing to anyone outside the circles he ran in now. A laptop with its hinge taped because he hadn't cared to replace it. A stack of legal pads with pages torn like snowy steps. It wasn't fancy by any standard his former classmates worshipped, but it was honest. The kind of honest that doesn't need a brand name. He picked up the card again, and with it, images marched in. Bradley on the student council, Mick, voice rich with certainty he'd inherited. Connor detailing a startup that was mostly buzzwords and borrowed logos. Tyson, captain of everything, mouth full of jokes that always landed on the same backs. Darius remembered the day he wore a hoodie to school because his blazer was at the dry cleaner. Dress code violation, someone sked. Street style, someone else sneered, playful like a shove. He'd gone home that night and taught himself 3 new libraries, just to remember what power felt like. The invite asked for our SVP. He smiled. Not the kind of smile people wear when they've won. The kind you make when an old door opens and you realize you braced for a punch that never came. 5 years. That's how long it had been since he walked across that stage, target on his back, diploma in his hand, the hush of relief louder than applause. 5 years since he took a job he didn't need to keep for more than a month but did, just to learn how the money moved. 5 years of replacing prove them wrong with prove it to yourself. He ran water into a glass and took a slow drink. The cold climbed his throat and steadied him. A text pinged. Ava name he trusted because she never told him who to be. Did you get the thing? He typed back, yeah, reunion, 3 dots. You go in. Another sip. The glass sweated. Thinking about it. She replied with 3 words that reached past the paper and into the past. Write your ending. He set the glass down, wiped the ring with the hem of his sleeve, and stared at that phrase until it blinked into a challenge. An ending wasn't just a door closing. It was the way you chose to walk through it. He pulled a hoodie over his head, the same charcoal one, with a small nick near the cuff, where a soldering iron had kissed it at 3 a.m. 2 years back. Folded inside the hoodie's pocket was the corner of a card from a venture firm that hadn't believed until it had to. He left it there, a reminder that faith from others arrives late and asks for a discount. The phone lit again, this time with a calendar alert he'd set and forgotten. Coltech model serving beta rollout. He smiled, genuine this time. The name still surprised him in the best way. Coltech had been a file name once, then an LLC, then a team that spoke his shorthand and argued like family. It was a stack of late nights, a sliver of seed money stretched thin as hope, a product too invisible to brag about on Instagram, but critical enough that a handful of serious people signed wire transfers with hands that didn't shake. He'd built it quietly, deliberately, the way you fix a foundation before you paint the walls. He looked back at the envelope. He wasn't the kid who needed anyone to clap anymore. He wasn't interested in revenge. Revenge is a short game, but truth the kind you can set down like a clean glass that lasts. And some truths are best delivered in the exact room where the lies were born. He checked the time printed in that insistent gold. Saturday, 7 p.m. He could show up at 6:59 and slip into a chair in the back. He could leave before dessert. He could do nothing at all. Freedom is all the choices you no longer fear. He went to the mirror by the door. It hung a little crooked, and he'd never fixed it. A private rebellion against symmetry. The face looking back was older than 5 years should make you still young, but with sleep borrowed and paid back at odd hours. He studied the eyes, steady. The mouth that learned to hold silence long enough for a room to tell the truth. He tugged the hoodie straight and thought not of how they'd see him, but of how he planned to see them, not as judges, not as architects of his past, but as people who mistook volume for vision. He slid the invitation into the hoodie pocket like a ticket, not to a show, to a reckoning. He grabbed his keys, felt their familiar edge, then set them down again, letting the moment breathe. A choice is heavier when you know what it weighs. On the counter, his laptop chimed, an email from operations with subject Westbridge Hall, vendor confirmation. He didn't open it. He just let the knowledge sit in his chest, quiet, certain, private. There are jokes that build their own punchlines if you give them time. He turned off the kitchen light and the room shrank to window glow. Outside, the street was a ribbon of heat and headlights. Voices rose and fell, ordinary and alive. He thought about the little boy he'd been, the one who walked hallways with his backpack like a shield. And he promised him something simple. You won't need armor tonight. The door clicked behind him. The stairwell smelled like dust and laundry soap. He took the steps 2 at a time, and with each one, the old school got smaller in his mind. Not because it mattered less, but because he did. At the bottom, he paused with his hand on the rail and smiled one more time. Not at the reunion, not at the people who would attend it, but at the design of it, all the way a life can be engineered. Quietly, until the only sound left is the truth arriving on time. Saturday at 7 wasn't far, and Darius Cole had never been more ready for a room that thought it knew him. He pushed into the night, and the door settled shut like a period at the end of a long sentence, one he'd finally learned to write himself. 5 years doesn't sound like much when you say it out loud. A presidential term, a child starting school, a handful of birthdays that fade into cakes and candles. But for Darius Cole, 5 years had been an entire lifetime, a furnace where the weak parts burned away, and only steel remained. After Westbridge Academy spat him out, Darius didn't follow the map laid down for kids from wealthy families. No Ivy League dorm room, no fraternity letters stitched into his sweatshirt, no polished internships lined up by fathers with business cards heavy as bricks. Instead, Darius carried his things in a duffel bag that smelled of detergent and bus rides, and he checked into a one-bedroom off Cullen Boulevard in Houston's 3rd Ward, the kind of neighborhood where ambition felt like a foreign language. He started small, too small for anyone to notice. A busted second-hand laptop, a chair that wobbled, internet that cut out every 3rd hour. He poured himself into code because code didn't care if his hoodie was frayed, or if his skin wasn't the color of the portraits that lined Westbridge's hallways. Code didn't flinch when he walked into a room. It responded to logic, not legacy. The first app he built failed in silence. To downloads both his. The second was better, a simple scheduling tool for local barbershops. That one earned him just enough to keep the lights on and noodles in the pot. Every time he refreshed his dashboard and saw a new shop sign up, a flicker lit inside him. A whisper, keep going. But the world outside didn't whisper. It sneered. At job fairs, recruiters smiled thinly when they realized he hadn't gone to Stanford or Met. At networking events, eyes slid past him toward shinier suits. Once, an angel investor actually laughed, after hearing his pitch, muttering, "Ambitious for a kid from your side of town." Darius swallowed it all. The humiliation, the hunger, the 2 a.m. rejections that pinged into his inbox like tiny knives. He let them pile up, not as proof of failure, but as fuel. He learned to turn coffee into code, heartbreak into persistence, loneliness into architecture. Every no was a blueprint for a yes. By the 2nd year, he was pulling 18-hour days. Friends stopped calling. Birthdays passed unnoticed. He lived in a rotation of hoodies and hooded silence, his body learning to run on less sleep than was decent. He knew he was gambling years of his life on a dream that could still collapse. But collapse, he realized, was familiar. He had collapsed before every day at Westbridge when laughter sharpened into weapons. This collapse was different. This one built muscle. Then came Coltech. Not the name yet. Just an idea, an infrastructure layer that could handle AI data more efficiently than anything on the market. Darius had noticed the cracks: how big companies stumbled over scaling, how startups wasted millions patching systems that should have been designed differently. From the ground up, he sketched diagrams on whiteboards, coded prototypes on his wobbly chair, tested them until the machine wheezed. The first investors he approached waved him off. Too ambitious, they said. Too green. But one late night, a venture capitalist from Austin, tired and curious, gave him 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes turned into an hour. That hour turned into a seed check, small by Silicon Valley standards. But to Darius it felt like someone had handed him a match in the dark. He didn't blow it on fancy offices or shiny branding. He hired 2 engineers he met online, both outsiders like him, both tired of being told no. They coded from apartments and libraries, surviving on takeout and caffeine, held together by nothing but Slack threads and stubbornness. When their servers crashed, they laughed bitterly, fixed it, and kept going. When competitors sneered at their name, they doubled their resolve. By year 3, Coltech had landed its first contract, a logistics company in Dallas, that needed to process mountains of shipping data. The system ran smoother, faster, and cheaper than anything they'd used before. Word spread, quietly at first, then louder. More contracts came, more sleepless nights. In year 4, investors who had once ignored him now asked for meetings. He turned some down out of principle. Others he entertained with polite disinterest. By the time Series B funding rolled in, Darius was no longer the boy with a busted laptop. He was the founder of a rising empire worth more than the entire annual budget of Westbridge Academy. Yet he told almost no one. His neighbors thought he freelanced. Old classmates on Instagram assumed he'd disappeared into obscurity. Darius kept it that way deliberately. Success, he knew, made people show their true faces, and he wasn't ready to let them see his not yet. But sometimes late at night, when his team finally logged off and the code finally passed every test, Darius would lean back in his chair, hoodie pulled tight, and whisper to himself, "They thought you'd never last. They thought you'd never matter, but you outlived their laughter." He didn't picture revenge. He pictured silence, the heavy, undeniable kind that falls when truth walks into a room. And now, 5 years later, that room had a date, a time, and an address: Westbridge Banquet Hall. Saturday, 7 p.m. Darius slipped the envelope back into his pocket. Not as a guest, not as a victim, as someone finally ready to let the silence speak for him. The night of the reunion came heavy with rain, the kind that streaks down glass like time running out. Westbridge Banquet Hall sat at the edge of downtown, a monument of polished stone and chandeliers, the kind of place that boasted its own history like a crown. To most of his former classmates, it was familiar ground. To Darius Cole, it was the very stage where ghosts still whispered. He arrived deliberately late 7:20 p.m. because he wanted the room to be full before he walked in. He wanted the laughter already flowing, the glasses already clinking, the pecking order already established. He parked his beat-up Honda across the street between two black SUVs with tinted windows. For a second, he sat in the driver's seat, watching silhouettes move behind the banquet hall's glowing windows. The bass thud of rented speakers pulsed faintly through the rain. He looked down at himself, the same charcoal hoodie, sleeves stretched, sneakers scuffed from years of sidewalks. It wasn't costume. It was armor. He could have worn a tailored suit, could have rented something that screamed money, but he didn't need to. Tonight wasn't about playing by their rules. Tonight was about rewriting them. The doorman gave him a once-over as he crossed the marble steps, a frown hovering but never landing. Darius pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped into the hall. The room smelled of lemon polish and too much cologne. Balloons arched over a long table lined with name tags. A projection screen hummed with a slideshow, smiling graduates in glossy prints. Then and now updates with LinkedIn-style headshots. Conversations rippled across the room like current. Heads turned, not all at once, but in a wave, the way water bends around an unexpected rock. Darius pinned the paper tag "Hello, my name is Darius Cole" onto his hoodie. The pin snagged on a loose thread, and he left it there, dangling slightly down from across the bar. A voice rose, "Yo, that's him, right?" Another voice, half laughing, "No way." Same hoodie vibe. "Told you he'd never change." A third, sharper, "I heard he's back living with his aunt. Some cashier gig, probably." The laughter that followed was thin, but sharp enough to draw blood. Darius didn't flinch. He moved through the room slowly, every step cushioned by the thick carpet, as if the place itself wanted to swallow the sound of his rival. He chose a table near the back, where shadow brushed the walls. From there, he could see everything: the stage, the bar, the buffet where shrimp skewers sweated under heat lamps. On stage, Tyson Reed, the same boy who had once ruled Westbridge's hallways like a petty king, now held the microphone. His tuxedo gleamed, cufflinks catching light as he tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, Westbridge Academy's finest," he boomed. The crowd cheered too loudly, trying to make their own importance echo. Beside Tyson, a slideshow rolled. Bradley in his lacrosse jersey turned corporate strategist. Connor with a photo in front of a rented office building. A girl named Ashley running a Pilates studio. Each slide prompted applause, laughter, applause again. Darius sipped from a glass of water, the condensation sliding into his palm. Then the whispers began to orbit him more deliberately. Bradley, tall and broad-shouldered, swaggered over with a champagne flute. Well, if it isn't Westbridge's ghost." His smile carried the same poison it had at 17. Behind him trailed Connor, who added with a smirk, "Still into computers, D. Or just fixing Wi-Fi for a living." Darius looked up calmly. "Something like that," he said. Connor laughed too loudly, as if to reassure himself. "Man, we're all building stuff now, startups, exits coming, you know. Timing's everything." Bradley clinked his glass against Connor's. "Timing, yeah. Guess some people just never catch it." They walked off, chuckling, leaving their arrogance in the air like smoke. At the next table, a girl whispered, "Why'd Tyson even invite him?" Her friend snorted, said it would be hilarious. A full circle moment. Savage. The first girl hesitated. "Relax, it's just a joke." On stage, Tyson pushed the mic again. All right, time for a little game." Then and now, photos flipped faster. Lawyers, consultants, one guy posing with a boat. The audience clapped on autopilot. Then a slide clicked over, and the frame froze on a blank gray square. Underneath, "Photo not provided." Laughter broke instantly, sharper than before. Guess some stories don't upload. Tyson joked, Fox sympathy dripping from his voice. The crowd roared. Darius lifted his glass and drank slowly. The water left a ring on the table. He wiped it away with his sleeve, calm, deliberate, from across the room. Tyson's eyes flicked toward him, bright with mischief. Don't worry, folks. We saved the best for last. He shuffled the cue cards like a magician holding the final trick. Special honorable mention tonight, most likely to still be different. His grin widened. Darius Cole, ladies and gentlemen. Heads snapped toward the back. A wave of chuckles rippled through the hall. Someone coughed, the thin kind that cuts deeper than laughter. Darius slid his chair back. The soft scrape of wood on tile echoed louder than the DJ's beat. He stood, offered a small nod that could have been thanks or dismissal, and sat again. The room shifted. The laughter faltered, then stumbled. Tyson forced the show onward, but the current had changed. Some people stared at Darius now, not with mockery, but with the first uneasy realization. He wasn't playing their game. And in Darius's chest, under the steady rhythm of his breath, the silence began to gather its weight, waiting for the moment it would finally speak. The reunion pressed on like a stage play running out of good lines. Tyson Reed strutted at the microphone, milking every pause like he was still the quarterback commanding a stadium. The spotlight washed him in shallow gold, but the sweat at his temples glistened in ways the light couldn't disguise. Okay, folks. He grinned, teeth to white. Time for our awards segment. He raised a stack of envelopes like they were sacred scripts. Let's celebrate the glow-ups, the bosses, the ones who made Westbridge proud. Polite applause trickled through the crowd. One by one, he tore open envelopes. Best glow-up went to a girl with diamond earrings so heavy she had to tilt her head. Most international went to a guy whose LinkedIn screamed about 2 weeks in Tokyo. Laughter rose, then dropped like waves hitting rocks. Darius sat silent at his table in the back, sipping water. Every time he set the glass down, it left another ring. Every time, he wiped it with his sleeve, slow, patient, as if drawing circles around the cracks in the room. Then Tyson lifted an envelope high, grin widening. And now an honorable mention. He paused, milking the suspense. This one's special, for the person most likely to still be different. His voice sharpened. Darius Cole, everyone. The hall erupted. Some clapped ironically, others whistled. A few shouted speech, speech. The laughter wasn't light, it was jagged, cruel, like glass rattling in a tin can. Darius stood slowly. His chair scraped the tile, and the sound cut through the laughter like a blade. He gave a single nod, small, almost courteous. Thanks, he said quietly, voice calm enough to sting. Then he sat again. The silence afterward wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of confusion, of an audience expecting a punchline and getting a mirror instead. Tyson coughed into the mic, stumbling into his next joke, but it landed flat. At a nearby table. Bradley leaned toward Connor. See, still the same loser, but Connor's laugh was nervous now, his eyes flicking to the back where Darius sat unshaken, hands folded on the table like he owned the silence itself. 2 women drifted past him toward the bar. They whispered just loud enough for Darius to catch. Why'd Tyson even bring him? Because it's funny, is it though? Darius let the words pass. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best answer is no answer at all, on stage. The slideshow sputtered back to life. Photos rolled, law degrees, new cars, startup logos pasted onto stock images. Then, for a beat too long, the projector froze again on the blank gray square where his update should have been. Photo not provided, it read, the words stark against the white screen. Snickers broke around the hall. Guess he doesn't have much to show, Tyson quipped, forcing out a laugh. Maybe still waiting for that big break. The room chuckled, but thinner now. Some eyes darted toward Darius, as if expecting him to flinch, to shrink, to finally give them the satisfaction of seeing old wounds still bleeding. But Darius only lifted his glass, drank slowly, and set it down again with deliberate care. The water ring bloomed on the table, and he wiped it away one more time, the motion steady, unhurried, like he was drawing the line between who he used to be and who he was now. The cruel games went on. Backhanded compliments, exaggerated stories, mocking glances tossed like darts across the room. Tyson kept the spotlight buzzing, but the rhythm faltered. Every joke that leaned toward Darius stumbled, as if the punchline refused to land, because beneath the laughter, beneath the champagne fizz and shallow pride, something else was rising, an unease no one could name yet. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was the creeping awareness that the boy they thought was an easy target wasn't playing by their script anymore, and in that awareness, the cruel games began to feel less like entertainment and more like desperation. The night dragged toward its center, heavy with music too loud for conversation and laughter too brittle to be real. Tyson Reed, still clinging to the microphone like it was the last prop in a sinking play, shuffled through his note cards. His grin faltered when he reached the bottom of the stack. He cleared his throat, and before we wrap this segment, his voice strained against the noise of clinking glasses. Let's thank tonight's sponsor, because none of this, he gestured toward the balloons, the catered shrimp skewers, the lukewarm champagne, would be possible without their generosity. He lifted the final card, then froze. It was blank. His grin twitched. Well, they've asked to remain anonymous. A nervous chuckle rippled across the room. But hey, let's give them a round of applause anyway. Polite claps scattered. The DJ pretended to find something on his laptop. The tension scratched against the chandeliers like static. That was when Darius Cole rose from his chair. The scrape of wood against tile was louder than the speakers, louder than the applause. Heads turned, conversations stuttered to silence. He moved steadily toward the stage, sneakers pressing into carpet that tried to swallow sound, but couldn't. Tyson blinked, caught like a deer in headlights as Darius climbed the steps. For a moment, no one breathed. The hall that had feasted on laughter only minutes ago now held its breath, as if waiting for a storm. Darius didn't reach for the mic right away. He adjusted his sleeve, tugged once at the edge of his hoodie, and let the silence stretch until it wrapped around every corner of the room. Then, in a voice low but clear, he said, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. The calm in his tone unnerved them more than any anger could have. He looked out over the tables at Bradley with his champagne trembling, at Connor biting his lip, at Tyson clutching cue cards like they might rewrite themselves. And I especially want to thank our sponsor, he continued, because Summit Gatherings isn't real. His mouth curved just enough. The sponsor tonight is me. Confusion cracked through the room like glass breaking. A laugh sputtered near the bar, then died when no one joined it. Someone muttered, wait, what? Darius slid his phone from his pocket. A single tap. The projector behind him blinked, the slideshow vanishing into black. Then headlines, bold and undeniable, filled the screen. Coltech raises $50 million in Series B funding. The new face of AI infrastructure. A Forbes cover, Darius Cole, CEO, sharp in a suit, eyes steady, gasps scattered. One woman whispered too loudly, that's him. Another stammered, no way, Photoshop. But article after article rolled across the screen. Investor lists, press photos, interviews, each headline a hammer driving the truth deeper. Darius turned back to them, his voice soft, almost intimate. So when you ask what I do now, he let the words hang, gestured lightly toward the screen. Something like this. The final slide held steady. Estimated net worth, $100 million. The silence that followed was unlike anything the hall had ever held. It wasn't the hush of cruelty or the pause before laughter. It was heavy, weighted, suffocating. Palms sweated against champagne stems. Eyes darted, but couldn't find purchase for the first time all night. Darius smiled. Not wide, not triumphant. Just a small smile, the kind that said the joke had always been on them. The projector light froze faces mid-expression, smirks curdled into shock. Eyes that once rolled now staring unblinking. The laughter that had fed on him minutes earlier hung in the air like a ghost. No one wanted to remember. Tyson swallowed hard into the microphone, his practiced grin cracking into something brittle. Well, his voice cracked again. Guess our boy made it after all. No one laughed. Phones lit up around the room, blue glow painting disbelief across cheeks. They searched. They confirmed. Every headline matched. Every photo was real. Darius Cole wasn't a nobody. He wasn't a failure. He wasn't even just successful. He was untouchable, and as shame began to ripple through them like a tide, Darius stood steady at the center of it all, the silence now working for him. The boy in the hoodie wasn't the target anymore. He was the measure. The silence after the projection was suffocating. Glasses dangled midair, laughter strangled itself in throats, and every polished smile dissolved into something brittle. Tyson Reed still held the microphone, but his knuckles were white, and for the first time in his life, the spotlight made him small. Darius let the stillness work, standing calm at the center of the stage. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The truth was already circling the hall like smoke, and all he had to do was breathe it in. When he finally spoke, his voice carried without force, steady and unshaken. "You see, what you called weird." His eyes moved deliberately across the room, catching Bradley, then Connor, then Tyson, was vision. "What you called failure was patience, and what you laughed at became the reason you're sitting in a hall I paid for." The words fell heavy, not sharp but undeniable, and each one struck deeper than cruelty ever could. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bradley stared into his champagne as if the bubbles might offer an escape. Connor tugged at his blazer sleeve, lips parting but no words coming. Tyson's cue cards trembled in his hand, the jokes written on them suddenly meaningless. Darius paced one step forward, his shadow stretching across the floor like a tide swallowing the stage. "The difference between us," he continued, "isn't luck. It isn't who our parents knew, or the color of our skin, or which side of town we grew up in. The difference is what we chose to believe about ourselves and about each other." The air thickened. No one moved. A waiter froze near the door, tray of shrimp skewers trembling in his grip. Two girls whispered at the edge of the room, forgetting how sound carried. "Why'd we laugh? Because we thought he'd never be anything." The second voice cracked. "And now he's everything we said he couldn't be." Darius stopped pacing and let those words hang in the silence. He didn't need to point at anyone. The shame already had. It pressed down on the crowd heavier than the suits on their shoulders. For the first time all night, he looked directly at Tyson. The once confident MC shifted under his gaze, eyes darting like a child caught lying. Darius didn't raise his voice, didn't sneer. He simply held the silence until Tyson lowered the mic on his own. Shrinking behind the podium that once made him feel tall, Darius gave a single nod, small but final. Then, without fanfare, he stepped down from the stage. His sneakers brushed against the carpet, each step a verdict. The hall remained frozen, no one daring to stop him, no one daring even to breathe too loud. The laughter that had targeted him earlier now echoed only in memory, twisted into a mirror that reflected their own arrogance back at them. And in that mirror, every face wore the same realization. They weren't laughing at him anymore. They were laughing at themselves. The doors of Westbridge Banquet Hall stood wide, spilling thin threads of music into the night, but inside, silence ruled. Darius Cole walked through the crowd, steady, unhurried, as if the carpet itself parted to make way for him. No one reached out. No one dared. Eyes that once rolled with contempt now dropped to the floor, unable to hold his gaze. Bradley hunched over his glass, swirling bubbles that had long since gone flat. The arrogance he once wore like a crown now sagged on him like a weight. Connor's phone buzzed with another investor notice final. Urgent, but he couldn't lift his head to read it. Tyson stood frozen behind the podium, cue cards limp in his grip. The spotlight he once relished now burning him raw. Darius passed them all without a word. He didn't need one. His footsteps carried more than any speech could. Each step said, "I survived you. I outgrew you. And now, I own the very stage you tried to bury me on." At the door, he paused. The cool night air licked his skin, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt. For a heartbeat, he thought of the boy he once was, the one who walked hallways with his books like armor, the one who laughed less because laughter always turned into knives. That boy was still with him, still watching, and tonight, finally, that boy was free. He turned once, glancing back at the banquet hall. The chandeliers glittered above heads bowed in shame. The projector light still glowed against the wall. Frozen on the headline, Coltech, $100 million valuation. The truth wasn't going away. It would haunt them long after the music died, long after the champagne lost its fizz, long after they crawled back into their curated lives. He stepped into the rain. It soaked into his hoodie, clung to his sneakers, but he didn't care. The night air was alive, sharp, honest. Outside, the world didn't ask for apologies. It only asked what you built when no one believed in you. Behind him, the doors swung shut with a soft, heavy thud, sealing the hall like a tomb. The laughter that once lived there would never sound the same again. That Darius breathed deep, lifted his chin, and walked down the steps into the city lights. For the first time, the label of loser was gone forever. Not because he shouted, not because he fought, but because he had turned their joke into his stage, their cruelty into his crown. He didn't just win. He rewrote the ending, and as the rain-slicked streets opened before him, one truth rang louder than any applause. The last one laughing wasn't them. It was him.